a role of dropping a word to his friend Tony Blair.
So did Bandar, the Saudi security chief who lobbied Mr Blair, threaten to stop cooperating in the war against terror? Well, that's the line the Prime Minister chose to take with the SFO and the British public.
The information I had came from a minute from the Prime Minister, I think it was, to the attorney, asking that we consider the public interest, and I also had the advantage of talking about it with our ambassador in Saudi Arabia.
So it was at the point when you got to the Swiss bank accounts that, if you like, the balloon went up and the alarm bells started ringing?
Yes.
The pressure was ratcheted up at Bandar's next port of call, Paris.
It's one of my favorite Airbus, so I'm always taking pictures of all the 340s in the world.
The prince had come to be seen with President Chirac. The subtext? The Saudis were thinking a French fighter might well replace BAE's plane in the new round of Yamamah.
That's as clear a way I would have thought as any of pointing a gun at the British government's head.
But there had to be another reason to stop the corruption probe, not the risk to a contract or jobs. The Anti-Bribery Convention forbids that. So our ambassador to Riyadh visited the SFO 3 times to make it clear there'd be a price to pay if the Saudis stopped cooperating on terrorism.
I was convinced that if this happened, if this cooperation was withdrawn, there was a significant risk to life.
What, lives were at stake?
Yeah.
That was a lot of pressure to put on you.
Well, sure, but I mean, if that's what's going to happen, then I've got to make a decision on that basis.
Maybe you could have stood up to this?
Well, maybe I could, and maybe if I did that and took a risk, maybe there'd have been some explosion on the streets of London.
And who controls the flow of Saudi intelligence on terrorism? Prince Bandar. Mr Wardle dropped the case.
Of course, I am not very happy when an investigation is stopped in its tracks like that, but sometimes you have to make these difficult decisions, and that's what I did.
That's life. That's politics in this case.
Well, it's politics, it's the law, it's the way things are.
The government and BAE had successfully muzzled the legal process. That's how many saw it. BAE wouldn't be interviewed by Panorama, but in a statement they said they acted lawfully, in accordance with the terms of the relevant contracts and with the approval of the Saudi government and the Ministry of Defence. It's the same line they took in a letter to the SFO when they admitted paying for support services under the Yamamah contract.
Was that effectively a get-out for them, or what?
Well, not necessarily. I think our view was our intention was to follow these payments and see whether they amounted to criminal offences.
So merely by saying they were acting under contractual arrangements didn't get them off the hook?
Well, of course not. I think in any arrangement where corrupt payments are made, BAE or whatever it is, the payments are going to be within the contract in some way, shape or form. The question is whether they were improper payments.
Now we may never know.
But the MOD still has questions to answer about the payments to Bandar they so willingly facilitated. They refused us an interview because, as they said in a statement, disclosing confidential Yamamah information would cause the damage which ending the investigation was designed to prevent. This does not imply that we believe the allegations you propose to make in the programme are true.
For 2 years, the government's chief law officer, the Attorney General, backed the SFO's corruption probe. But then they got hold of MOD documents, and the Swiss looked like opening up those accounts. Then Lord Goldsmith declared the case wasn't going to succeed.
The Attorney General made it clear afterwards that he thought that the SFO, that you, did not have a case. I mean, leaving aside the public interest argument, do you agree with that?
I felt that in a normal case one would have pursued the line of evidence to see whether there was sufficient evidence to justify a prosecution. To that extent, I disagree with him, yes.
You felt you hadn't reached the end of the line?
Absolutely, yes.
Lord Goldsmith, Hello, it's Jane Corbin from Panorama. We wanted to do an interview with you about the dropping of the SFO inquiry.
Oh, you've got lots of information about that already. You've got plenty of information.
We wanted actually specifically to ask you about the payments that were made to Prince Bandar.
Why didn't you ask the director of the SFO?
Well, we have asked him, but we wondered what your view was.
Well, you know my view because I've expressed it in Parliament and I've expressed it many times. So you've got that.
But I don't think you've talked to Parliament about Prince Bandar.
I've talked about all of this.
Thank you very much.
All right.
In fact, the Attorney-General never told Parliament about Prince Bandar. But we know that he knows, the SFO knows, payments went through his government to the Prince. The Swiss, meanwhile, have begun their own investigation, and the Americans may launch one too, under their stringent anti-corruption laws.
There's been tremendous disappointment internationally that whereas they look to the United Kingdom to come up with solutions, practical, good example, instead we're just sleazeballs.
Prince Bandar declined an interview, but his lawyers have admitted payments were made into Riggs Bank with the UK and Saudi government's approval, just as Panorama has revealed. Bandar was a signatory, they said, but the money went for purposes approved by the Saudi Ministry of Defence, not for him personally. The palace, an official residence. But the big question remains. Why were such huge payments made by such a secretive and convoluted route? And what were they for? Here's a last word from the Prince on the subject of corruption.
We did not invent corruption. This happened since Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve were in heaven, and they had hanky-panky, and they had to go down to earth. So, I mean, this is human nature. But we are not as bad as you think.
And so the moral of the story is that if you're a British arms dealer, make sure you've got government cover written into the contract. Then a kickback or two should be no problem.
Jane Corbin there. Well, the Serious Fraud Office is still investigating other BAE arms deals, including sales to South Africa and Tanzania. No word yet on their outcome. Next week, is TV bad for my kids? Panorama finds out what happens when you take TVs, computers and games consoles away from a class of 7- and 8-year-olds.